All right, Erik, I want your thoughts on the biggest spring questions for Oregon as practice continues to roll along. I go to one of two places. Now, I have a third on the list, but it's not as pressing and I'm not as worried about it. So, for me, the biggest question is the secondary. And I know the last impression a lot of Oregon fans have of the secondary is thumbs down and not the Michigan, are you not entertained thumbs down? Like bad thumbs down, it wasn't good. However, I don't care who you've got on the roster, who you bring in via the portal. You lose your top six defensive backs. I think this is the biggest single season exodus at the secondary in the secondary that I can remember, at least since I've been covering the Ducks on the show. I don't think I've ever seen the top six go away. So that's my number one question because I don't know who really five of the starters are going to be. I know who it could be. I have an idea. I know that Dillon Thieneman's starting at safety, the Purdue transfer. I know that. That is a 100% guarantee lock. You put that in Sharpie, you're good to go. Outside of that, do you have any 100% guarantees in that unit?
No. I'll expound more. No,
good.
I don't.
I was hoping you might.
Really great guesswork by me. No, I know, and I just we'll start with Dillon. Like, I think he's probably got the highest opinion amongst players we've talked to and coaches. Like, they just rave about him every chance they get, and go out of their way to bring him up. Like at this point in camp, and it's early, a lot of the questions are going to center around like, "Hey, this guy's new. Tell us about him." But there have been several instances where I think Bryce Betcher just went out of his way to be like, "Yeah, this Dillon kid's really good. He's like everything you want in terms of the total package of behind the scenes, the culture, the IQ, the work ethic. Obviously, on field sort of speaks for itself." So I think that you're right. That one is a layup. That's happening, and he's probably going to be the best safety athlete Oregon's had since Javon Holland. Is kind of my. It's been my pitch.
That's my expectation. I mean, that's the hope that I have for him. That's the hope.
And probably I don't want to overlook Verone because he ended up the year after Javon left. I think was an All-American. So I'm not going to say he's going to.
2021, he was an All-American. Right. 2020 or 2019, the year after Javon left, I think he.
You're right. That was the 2020 season.
Yeah,
he was all conference. Yeah, right. So either way, I don't want to overlook it and say Dillon's going to be like the best safety since X, Y, or Z because Verone left set a really high standard, and certainly Javon did, and Ugo and all sorts of guys that have been here. But this feels like a guy who can go in and, similar to Javon, be an NFL guy right away. The rest of the roster, it's like who knows? I mean, legitimately, and in a good way because I just had this stat. I think it's 6 of the 13 highest rated cornerback signees in school history are on this roster. And only 2 of them have played more than 5 snaps. So yeah. It's like super talented guys. And that's kind of the crux of this whole spring camp. And I think Dan has said it, and Tosh has said it, and Will has said it. Everybody who's come to the podium has basically said it. We know we're super talented. We also know we have very little experience at a lot of places. And this is absolutely one of those. So I wouldn't be surprised if they break fall camp and it's 2 of these true freshmen or redshirt freshmen are in the starting lineup. If Naeem Offert or Finney or Brew or Trey McNutt or, Ife Obadegwu, who I think is someone people overlook,
Lopa,
I've
heard some buzz on Iffy. I've heard buzz on Iffy Obadegwu.
And that's been sort of publicly as well. But it wouldn't surprise me if 2 or 3 of those guys end up breaking camp as starters. It wouldn't surprise me if it takes a while, but those sort of players end up starters. But it's the interesting thing is that they have at least brought in enough veteran guys from other schools. We mentioned Thieneman, but then there's also Jaden Kennedy. Jaden or Jadon?
Jadon, I believe it's Jadon Kennedy.
Okay, Jadon Kennedy. And then Theron Johnson. You at least give yourself, Johnson has a lot of experience as a starting outside corner. Kennedy's played a lot of nickel. Worst case scenario, and it's not worst case, maybe best case scenario is these guys are awesome. But there's a situation where you get one of these guys who, again, doesn't have the same sort of ceiling in terms of NFL draft talent, so maybe not the physical traits, can fill in early. And then you hope by the time you're kind of pushing into postseason play, some of these young guys are ascending. And those are the players that are matching up against Ohio State in a big spot because, you did the thumbs down thing. I don't think there's any question about that. If you want to be optimistic and do the thumbs up thing, if you're an Oregon fan, it's none of those guys are going to be on the team this year. And that gives you a totally blank slate. And whether or not that ends up being a good thing or not is one of the big question marks. And your point, probably one of the big questions of camp.
Yeah, I just think that much turnover and so many different options and avenues. I frankly, Eric, want to see a lot of young guys play, but that's also my perspective on the 2025 season. And this is shared by some Oregon fans. It's certainly not shared by some other Oregon fans
Right.
who I've heard from. And I doubt that Dan Lanning sees it this way. I look at 2025 not as a rebuild, but kind of a soft reset year. And I think their next best chance to win a national title is 2026. I fully expect this team with this schedule to be able to make the playoff. If you gave this team a more brutal schedule, I would probably look at it and say, I hope they make the playoff, but don't expect them to. This schedule, the talent they do have, I expect them to be able to make it because it works in their favor in just so many ways. But I would like it for the secondary to be ready for 2026. I want to see plenty of Naeem Offord or Dakota Fields or Ife Obadeg or any of those young guys work up your NIL package as best you can to get Thieneman and Mateo to come back for 2026 as well. And that's your next best chance. That's just the way I see it because they lost so much from a year ago. 6 DBs, 2 linebackers, 3 defensive linemen, 4 offensive linemen, a quarterback, and 2 receivers. Sorry, that's just a lot. So that's just the way I look at the secondary and say, I would like to see the young, maybe they're not ready to step onto the field right away, but by the end of the year, I hope we're seeing kind of the next wave of Oregon defensive backs.
Also lost top 2 tight ends and their leading rusher. So
I didn't even, I just overlook. I mean,
and that just kind of solidifies your point, doesn't it, though?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I think expectations for 25 should be different from what they were in 23 and 24. Because those were, I know that they, especially 24, there was a ton of portal additions, a ton of newcomers they relied on.
A ton of returners.
Yes, but I was going to say there were also a ton of returners. And in both cases, especially 24 and a lot of 23, that was a veteran group that had kind of had some time together, right? And had kind of come together. That's not the makeup of this team, and that doesn't mean it can't be really good. And I think that's what could make this like a really special season. Because let's say for a second, Spencer, you're right, the schedule is not difficult. Let's say it all does start to gel and they are able to kind of maneuver their way through with some growing pains. Probably don't beat Penn State early just because that's a tough ask with the way this team is built. I'm not saying they can't, but let's just for a second say that. But let's say they get hot after that, they win 7 straight and they are competing for a Big Ten championship and they make the playoff and they make it through a couple of rounds. That's a huge win for this roster considering all the questions that we have right now. Like, because legitimately we enter spring and we're still in spring, halfway through it about. And we don't know the secondary. We really don't know the defensive line. We think the offensive line was addressed really well through the portal with at least experienced players, but we don't know how that's going to go. Like, there's so many questions. And then you come to how good are they going to be at quarterback, right? And like, I just think it's hard for us right now in early April to say expectations for 25 should be similar to what they were preseason around this time for 23 and 24. Doesn't mean they can't get there, but I think if it does, it sort of would speak to a really special season. Maybe not on par with last year because last year was 13-0 and all that, but just because that the expectations are a little different this year.
I think the optimistic outlook for this year is the schedule allows them to work out the growing pains, get settled, get acclimated with 4 new offensive linemen around Poncho, with all the new guys in the secondary, figure out what your receiver depth chart is, get Dante Moore settled into being the starting quarterback and get him protecting the football and whatnot. And then they get to the tough game. And I agree. I don't know if I'll ever get to a point where I think Oregon wins that game at Penn State. They could. I just don't know if you said, hey, you got to put $50 on it, Spencer. I'd take Penn State for a number of reasons. But I think they can grow because you have your 2 non-conference games early on at home. Oklahoma State, Oregon State. Your road game is Northwestern. You start with an FCS school. Oregon should be able to roll out of bed and go 4-0 in any given year with that particular schedule. Now, if you're going to Stillwater or if you're going to Reser Stadium, I might feel differently. But alas, they're not. So I certainly think that's kind of the optimistic outlook of it is they don't have to be great right away to still have a really good year. They can kind of slow walk into their in-season development, kind of like they did with the offensive line a season ago.